Hey everybody, welcome back to the Wolf Pit. Winter is my least favorite time of the year, simply because I don't like being cold. But when it's wintertime, being inside with a big hot bowl of soup, looking outside when it's cold isn't too bad. So here's some of my favorite soup recipes that'll feed and warm your belly throughout the cold winter, even if you're one of those people that enjoy the cold, miserable doldrums of winter. And the best thing about belly filling and belly warming soup is that it's budget friendly. I hate to beat a dead horse to death, but I have to keep repeating it for new viewers who may not be familiar with the type of budget meals that I'm making. So if you are new to the channel, welcome aboard and hit that subscribe button. I hate to call these budget meals struggle meals, but you gotta say it like it is. People are struggling to feed themselves and or their family every day. So my purpose with these videos is to ensure that everyone can feed themselves and or their family at least one meal a day. So with that said, the serving sizes aren't going to be huge, but you're going to survive a whole lot longer with a little bit of something in your stomach than nothing in your stomach. The ironic thing about today's so-called struggle meal is that regardless of your income, everyone eats this, or at least they have once or twice in their lifetime. If they haven't, they've been living under a big rock. And it starts with a very inexpensive, delicious, and nutritious ingredient: dried beans. Beans in general are not only nutritious and delicious, they're also very entertaining. So it's a 2-for-1 on this meal. You get dinner and a concert. Besides being nutritious, delicious, and inexpensive, beans more than double their size after you cook them. So if you start off with a 1-pound bag of dried beans, that's 2 cups of beans. But once you soak those beans, you end up with 6 cups of beans. And a 1-pound bag of dried beans costs right around $1. So right there alone, for right around $1, you have food to feed your family. If you happen to have leftover vegetables or meat, you could also add them to the beans. You can buy some other ingredients to really kick up the beans. And the ingredients aren't specific. You can add whatever you like into your beans. And that's what we're doing today. We're just gonna make a hearty pot of very inexpensive bean soup that will feed a ton of people. In a few previous videos, I had some knuckleheads tell me that I was lying about the price of these meals. So this list is for you, the knuckleheads. Don't ever question my integrity. So if you're really struggling, this recipe today can make 24 half-cup servings for 34 cents a serving. And I already know there's someone out there that's gonna say, who's gonna get full off a half a cup of beans? For you to even ask that question, you've never really struggled. These recipes aren't meant to make you full. They're meant to help you survive for as little money as possible. So I'm going to start by pouring a 2-pound bag of dried northern beans into a pot. And then we'll pick through them for rocks or any other debris that shouldn't be in there. And then we'll take them over to the sink and rinse them off. And then put them back on the stove and fill the pot with water, at least 2 times as much water as you have beans. Once these beans have soaked, I'm probably going to have to switch to a bigger pot, but we're going to wait and see. Now give them a good mix and turn the heat up on high and bring the beans up to a simmer. Once everything's come up to a heavy simmer, give it a mix, turn the heat off, put the lid on the pot, and let it sit for about 2 hours. You can let the beans soak for less time or more time. This is just the way I normally do it. You can also just put them in a pot of water overnight. But technically, you don't even have to soak the beans. You can put them in a pot with sufficient liquid and start cooking from there. Here's what our beans look like after sitting for 2 hours. And you can tell they've soaked up pretty much most of the water and more than doubled in size, which leaves me no room to add the other ingredients. So we'll have to switch over to a bigger pot, which brings up the other great debate. Do you save the water that the beans soaked in, or do you dump it out and add new water? Some people say if you drain the water and add new water, it will reduce the gas you get from the beans. And my reply to that statement would be why? Why on earth would you want to reduce the gas in the beans? You're taking half the fun out of eating the beans. I never dump it out. I leave it in and add more water as necessary. There's flavor in that water, especially if you don't have enough money to buy meat. So once the beans are soaked and we transferred them to a bigger pot, we added a couple teaspoons of fresh, homegrown minced garlic, straight out of the jar. If you don't have fresh garlic, use granulated garlic. And then add some carrots, sliced or diced. And then some chopped onion, chopped celery, and a few bay leaves, if you have them. If you don't, it's not a big deal. Now give it all a good mix. If you noticed, I haven't really added any seasonings yet, which brings up another debate, is whether salt will toughen your beans or not. In my experience, adding salt before the beans are finished cooking, it does toughen up the beans. You may disagree. That's just in my experience. But feel free to add whatever seasonings you like in your beans. Just in my opinion, I'd hold off until later to add any salt. Once everything's mixed together and happy, add any kind of smoked meat or regular meat you like. My first choice of meat to use in a pot of beans is always going to be smoked pork ham hocks. They have the most meat, the most fat, which equals flavor, and the most smokiness. But evidently, there's a shortage of smoked ham hocks in my area, because I couldn't even find any for Thanksgiving. So I opted for smoked turkey legs, for Thanksgiving collard greens, and for today's pot of beans. But you can use any kind of smoked meat or bones, or unsmoked meat or bones. You could also use leftover meat if you like. Or if you don't have any meat available or money to buy meat, hopefully you save your bacon grease, and you can put a tablespoon or two of the bacon grease in with the beans. But there's one more option you can do that doesn't cost anything. If you're invited over to your family's or friend's house for Christmas or New Year's dinner and they're serving ham, ask them if you can take the leftover ham bone home with you. You might just get lucky and they don't realize that a ham bone is gold when it comes to making bean soup. Once your turkey legs are in place, add enough water to cover everything. Stop it, I already know what you're gonna say. It would taste a whole lot better if you added some chicken broth or chicken stock to it instead of water. Well, this video is not about you, broth, or stock. Some people may not have that extra $1 or $2 to get the broth, the stock, or the bouillon. And to be quite frank, in this recipe, broth or stock isn't necessary even if you could afford it. Those 2 turkey legs will provide more than enough flavor mixed with the water and the beans and the vegetables. Now, if you're not able to add any meat in with the beans for any reason, then that would be a perfect time to use broth or stock instead of water to add some flavor. And that is if you have broth or stock. So put the lid on the pot, bring it up to a simmer, reduce the heat to medium-low, and we'll check back in about an hour or so. And here's what our beans and turkey legs look like after the first hour. So just move everything around just a little bit and check your water levels too. Depending on how much water you added to begin with, you may need to add more water. Now put the lid back on and let the beans continue to cook for another hour. Here's what our pot of beans looks like after simmering for 2 hours now. Now it looks like we're right at the beginning stage of everything starting to break down. So give it another mix, put the lid back on, and let it go for another 45 minutes to an hour. And here's our beans at the 3-hour mark. And they're about 90% done. Give everything a good mix, and then remove the turkey legs from the pot. And then remove all the meat from the bones. And then once you've gotten all the turkey meat off the bones, add it back in with the beans. And you'll notice Mrs. Wolfpit is picking out some of the pieces of cartilage that look like little bones. You really want to be careful of those because they're real easy to miss, and they're a choking hazard, especially if you have little kids. So try a couple of the beans to ensure they're tender. And then once they're tender, you can add some salt and other seasonings that you like. And I'm just sticking with the basics and using some Lowry seasoning salt. Use whatever seasonings you have to spice it up to your liking. Once you season your bean soup the way you like it, give it a mix, and it's ready to eat. But I like mine a little bit thicker than this, so I'm gonna let it cook for another 30 minutes without the lid on. After simmering for the final 30 minutes, our soup is thickened up nicely, and now it's how I like it. Now grab a ladle and let's get some in a bowl. And there you have it, a very hearty bowl of navy bean soup with smoked turkey legs and vegetables. Enjoy this with a couple slices of bread, or cornbread would be even better if you're able to. Now in the beginning of the video, I said you could make 24 half-cup servings for 34 cents each for a total of $8.04. Now that would have to be done under really hard, harsh times. I'm not a doctor, but I think you could survive off a half a cup of this per meal per day. But like I said, that would have to be under unusually hard times. So if you double the portion size to 12 one-cup servings for 67 cents a serving, I think that's more realistic. But then if you triple the serving size to 6 1.5-cup servings for $1 a serving, I think that's the most realistic size serving. The bottom line is, this hearty, stick-to-your-ribs, nutritious, delicious, and inexpensive meal only costs $8.04, no matter the serving size. As we're all witnessing, inflation is real. Gas prices continue to increase every day to the point it's costing people body parts. Pretty soon, people are going to have to get part-time jobs just to afford gas to go to work. And then on top of that, food prices are increasing every day. Pretty soon, it might get to the point all we can afford to eat is beans and rice and beans. But we're not to that point yet. But if we do get to that point, today's recipe will be perfect. Even if we don't get to that point, today's recipe is very inexpensive, nutritious, and delicious. The recipe we're making today fits our current situation, and it's called inflation stew. But it's more like a very inexpensive cabbage roll soup, which only costs a mere 26 cents per serving. So let's get started. You're going to need a large pot for this recipe. The one I'm using today is 8.5 quarts, and you're going to need a pot at least that size or bigger for this recipe. I have the pot over medium-high heat, and I've added just a little bit of vegetable oil. If you save up your bacon grease, this will be a good time to use it. It's not only free, but it's tasty. Once the pan is preheated and the oil is hot, I'm going to add one very large yellow onion that I've cut into bite-sized pieces. You can cut them in strips or cut them in smaller pieces if you like. Saute the onions for a few minutes until they begin to sweat. Once you sauteed your onions, add 12 ounces of tomato paste. And then saute it with the onions for a few more minutes. And then add about a tablespoon of minced garlic. Saute for just a couple more minutes. And then add 1 quart of beef broth. Followed by 1 quart of water. And then give it all a good mix. And then add two 15-ounce cans of stewed tomatoes. I like stewed tomatoes because they're nice and sweet and they're delicious. If you don't like stewed tomatoes, you can get the whole peeled plum tomatoes, or crushed tomatoes, or tomato sauce. Now give it all a good mix and bring it up to a boil. And then season with a little kosher salt, black pepper, and paprika. Then give it a good mix to get all the flavors combined. And then bring it back up to a boil. And then add a 3-pound head of cabbage that's been cut up into bite-sized pieces. If you start thinking you're going to need a bigger pot, don't worry. It doesn't all fit immediately, but after cooking for a few minutes, it'll cook down, and by the time the recipe is done, it'll cook way down. Now give it all a good mix and let the cabbage cook for about 10 minutes. I'm looking for tender cabbage. I don't want fall apart soft cabbage. So if you want your cabbage softer, cook it a little bit longer. Once the cabbage is cooked down, add another quart of water. And then add a 1-pound bag of dried lentils that have been rinsed and drained. Normally, ground beef would go in cabbage rolls or cabbage roll soup, but ground beef is expensive, and we're trying to eat on an inflation-based budget. So lentils are a very good, delicious, and healthy protein substitute. So give it all a good mix, bring it back up to a boil, cover, reduce the heat to medium, and let the lentils cook for about 15 minutes. After 15 minutes, take the lid off, give it all a good mix. And then try a little spoonful of the lentils to see if they're done yet. And after cooking for 15 minutes with the lid on, they were almost done, but they were still just a little bit firm. But that's okay, because we have one more ingredient to add. And that's 4 cups of cooked rice. So that would be 2 cups of uncooked rice. Or if you don't even want to measure, it's a 1-pound bag of rice. Now mix in the rice, replace the lid, and let it cook for another 10 minutes. After cooking for 10 minutes with the lid on, our inflation stew thickened up a little bit too much. So we added a couple more cups of water. After we added the water, bring it back up to a simmer and then taste for seasoning. And it needed just a little bit more salt, pepper, and paprika. Now I'm going to tell you this right now before the end of the video. At the table, I added a little bit of Worcestershire sauce and some hot sauce. And before I tell you how it turned out, I recommend adding it to the recipe before it gets to the table. But everyone might not like the hot sauce or the Worcestershire sauce, so you can do it either way. I originally just left it out of the video because it is a budget video and everyone might not have hot sauce or Worcestershire sauce. But just like with any recipe, use the recipe as a guide, not as a rule. Add things you like. If you don't like lentils, use another type of legume. Add different vegetables. Make it the way you like it. Now at this point, our inflation stew is ready. And in the beginning of the video, I said the cost was 26 cents per serving, and that's a 1 cup serving. But in this bowl, there's 2 cups, which I actually had a hard time eating. This soup was extremely filling and delicious. The total cost of this meal was $8.34, and I'm gonna guess that in this 8.5 quart pot, I have 32 1-cup servings, which would be 26 cents per serving. Or in the bowl you see here, that's 2 cups, which will be 52 cents a serving. Either way, it's extremely inexpensive, filling, healthy, and delicious. As summer's officially coming to an end, the pools are closing, and soon the leaves will begin to fall, which eventually leads to the horrifying white stuff falling from the sky, and then the winter doldrums set in. That's when a big bowl of hearty hot soup is required. It comforts you, fills and warms your belly, and at least temporarily, it lets you forget about the blistering cold outside. Soups are also generally inexpensive to make, like homemade chicken noodle soup, which is probably the most popular and comforting soup of all. Or homemade vegetable beef soup, split pea soup with smoked ham, which is my personal favorite, or smoky ham and potato soup. They're all inexpensive and delicious. But I have another favorite soup that only takes a couple minutes to put together, is very inexpensive, hearty, and most of all, delicious. It's poor man's vegetable beef and noodle soup, which only uses 5 ingredients, not including seasonings, and costs less than $10 to make. This pot of soup will easily feed a family of 4 or more. So let's get started by adding 80-20 ground beef to our pot. You can use leaner or fattier ground beef if you like, but I like the flavor and the fat in the 80-20 ground beef. You can also use ground turkey, ground chicken, ground pork, or even leftover meat if you have some. My pot's on medium-high, and I'm going to break up the ground beef a bit, and then let it sit and cook for a few minutes before I start mixing it around. After it's cooked for a few minutes, give it a stir, and then continue to stir until most of the ground beef is browned. It doesn't have to be fully cooked at this point, we're just trying to render a bit of the fat. Once 90% of the ground beef is browned, drain off most but not all the fat. Leave some in for flavor. Once the ground beef is drained, put it back in the pot and add beef stock, or you can use beef broth. I like to use beef stock because I think it has a more robust flavor. If you're wondering what the difference is between stock and broth, stock is made with bones and meat trimmings, along with vegetables. Oven roasting the bones before they go in the stock pot adds even more flavor. And broth is made with meat and vegetables. Unless you're making a vegetable broth, then obviously you're using all vegetables. Now pour in a can of undrained diced tomatoes. If you don't want to use tomatoes, leave them out. Once you add the ground beef and stock, what you add from that point on is only limited by your imagination. Add anything and everything you like. Give it a quick mix. Then add some Worcestershire sauce. Add as little or as much as you like. Add a little now, taste it later, add more later. But if you want to make it just like I am, you can find a full copy of the recipe at thewolfpit.com. Then add granulated onion, granulated garlic, and feel free to add any other herbs or seasonings you like. I'm using the KISS method, which means keep it simple, stupid. And finally, a little salt and black pepper. Again, add a little now, taste it later, and add more later if necessary. Then give it a good mix. And bring it up to a light boil. Now add your vegetables. And you can use fresh, frozen, or canned vegetables. Or of course, if you have them, leftover vegetables. I'm using a bag of frozen mixed vegetables today, which has peas, carrots, corn, and green beans. We like a lot of vegetables, so I'm adding a lot. If you like less vegetables, add less. If you like more, add more. Then bring it back to a light boil. Then reduce the heat to medium-low, cover, and let it simmer for 25 to 30 minutes or longer if you like your vegetables softer. Obviously, cooking times are going to vary depending on the type of vegetables you use. Once the vegetables are cooked the way you like them, add the egg noodles. Again, the amount you add is up to you. Add a little or a lot, and you can use any kind of noodles. Use what you like or what you have on hand. Now I'm going to add some water because the noodles are going to absorb a lot of the liquid. You could also add some more stock or broth instead of water. If you want it soupier, add more liquid. If you want it thicker, add less. It's your soup, you got to eat it, so make it the way you like it. Give it a good stir, cover, and let it cook until the noodles are done. After about 8 minutes, the egg noodles are done. And there you have it. That's all there is to making poor man's vegetable beef and noodle soup. It doesn't get much easier or more delicious than this, does it? Winter. I loathe winter more than anything in this whole world. It's cold, it's dark, and it's simply miserable. I don't like it getting dark at 5 p.m., I don't like being cold, and I certainly don't like being miserable. But there is one thing I love about winter. The delicious, belly-warming, belly-filling soups and stews. That's right, I'm making a whole pot of ham and potato soup for a total of $9.41 or 94 cents per serving. So even if you are on a budget, you can eat good, comforting, delicious foods. So let's get started. In a large pot over medium-high heat, add the obligatory half a stick of butter. When a recipe starts with butter, you know it's going to be good. There's no way a recipe that starts with butter is going to be bad. Once the butter is melted and nice and hot, add about 4 cloves of chopped garlic, 1 cup of chopped yellow onion, 1 cup of chopped celery, and 1 cup of chopped carrots, followed by a 2-pound ham steak that's been cut in cubes. You can adjust the amounts of garlic, onions, celery, carrots, and ham to suit your taste and your budget. So once everything's in the pan, give it a good mix and let it cook for about 5 minutes. And you see now how much water is in the ham. And then add about 1/3 cup of all-purpose flour. Now give it all a good mix until all the moisture is incorporated into the flour. Now for the broth, I added a tablespoon of chicken base and a quart of water. But you can also just use a quart of chicken broth. Just use what you have or what suits your budget. Once all the broth has been added, season it up how you like. I just use black pepper. And it looks like a large amount of black pepper, but it's not nearly as much as it looks like. I didn't use any additional salt due to the ham and the chicken base. If you plan on making this recipe, I would hold off until the very end and give it a taste before you add any salt. Now bring everything up to a boil, reduce the heat to low, and let everything cook for 20 to 30 minutes or until the vegetables are nice and tender. After 20 to 30 minutes and everything's nice and tender, you'll see that the broth is starting to thicken up. And that's due to the roux and the starches in the potatoes. Now if you have any problems with eating dairy, you can skip the butter in the beginning and just use cooking oil, and you could stop the recipe right here and eat the soup as it is. But if you don't have a problem with dairy, you can richen it up like I did with 2 cups of whole milk, or you can use heavy cream or half and half. Once you've added whatever dairy product you like, give it all a good mix and let it simmer for another 5 to 10 minutes. And there you have it. That's how you make homemade, delicious, belly-warming, and belly-filling potato soup with ham on a budget. This ham and potato soup is not only smoky, rich, creamy, and delicious, it's also very budget-friendly. But whether you're on a budget or not, this soup will soothe your soul. That's how you eat simple, easy, delicious foods on a budget.
Today I'm making one of my favorite comfort foods, hearty split pea and ham soup. It's real easy to make, it's good for you, and it's delicious. What else can you ask for? So let's get started. I have 2 pounds of dried split peas that I've thoroughly rinsed and drained. Now I'm going to dump them out into the pan, and normally they're loose, but I guess the combination of the starch and the water glued them together. Now I'm going to add 1 gallon of cold water. You can find a full printable copy of this recipe and many more at the Wolf Pit blog. Now break all the peas apart and give them a good mix. And then bring them up to a boil. And then once they come up to a boil, let them boil for 5 minutes, then turn off the heat, put the lid on, and let them sit for 1 hour. And what I'm doing here is rehydrating the peas, and there's several different ways you can do this. You can soak them overnight and rehydrate them, or you can do the quick method like what I'm doing today. Now after soaking in the hot water for an hour, the peas have doubled in size and now are ready to start cooking. Give them a good mix, and then I'm going to add some chopped yellow onion, a couple bay leaves, fresh carrots, and you can cut these as big or as small as you like, and some cubed Smithfield, Virginia ham. I'm just using a ham steak today, but you can use whatever kind of ham you like to eat. The leftover ham bone from your holiday ham would be perfect, or ham hocks, whatever kind of ham you have and you like to eat. The only kind of ham I would not use is country ham. Followed by granulated garlic, and black pepper, and I'm not going to add any salt at this point due to the salt in the ham. I'll taste it towards the end and add salt if necessary. Now give it a good mix and bring it up to a boil. Once it's come up to a boil, reduce the heat to low, cover, and let it simmer for 1 hour. Here's the peas after simmering for 1 hour, and as you can tell, the soup is really starting to come together and the peas are breaking down, but they're not quite done yet. You want the peas to be as smooth as possible, so I'm going to replace the lid and let them simmer for 30 more minutes. After simmering for another 30 minutes, the peas are nice and smooth, and I gave it a taste and it needs a little more salt and pepper. Give it one more mix to get the salt and pepper combined. And there you have it. That's all there is to making one of my favorite comfort foods, hearty split pea and ham soup. I told you it's real easy to make, it's very delicious, and it's good for you. If you want to make this even better and add some richness and make it not so good for you, once you get it in the bowl, mix in a couple tablespoons of heavy cream.
Today, we're making chicken noodle soup. Start off with a whole chicken, kosher salt, 2 bay leaves, and a gallon of water. And then bring it up to a boil and let it boil for 10 minutes. After boiling for 10 minutes, skim off the scum on the top, cover, turn the heat off, and let the chicken soak in the broth for 1 hour. After 1 hour, break your chicken apart and remove it from the pot. Then turn the heat back up on high, bring the pot back up to a boil, add carrots, celery, onions, granulated garlic, sage, and black pepper. Remember, we added salt in the beginning. And then give it all a good mix, reduce the heat to medium, and let it simmer for about 20 minutes until the carrots and celery are done to your liking. While the vegetables are simmering, pull all the chicken off the bones and discard any unwanted skin or fat. Once the vegetables are almost done to your liking, add egg noodles. Give it all a good mix and let the noodles cook for about 5 minutes. After 5 minutes, add your deboned chicken back in, and then give it another good mix and let it cook for another 5 minutes or so until the noodles are done and the chicken is heated through. And that's how you make savory, rich and delicious chicken noodle soup.